G'day, how you going? In this video I'm going to be painting a Terminator from the Pyre Warband of Chaos Space Marines. And to begin with, I primed the model with a standard grey from Colourforge. Citadel's Mechanicus standard grey would do the trick too. I then grabbed a very old and worn brush and began layering Centurion Red from the 2 thin coats range all over the model. This did take a few coats, maybe about 3, and once I noticed the colour finally building, I moved to a smaller brush and focused my brush strokes more to individual areas at a time. Switching to a smaller layer brush helps reduce messy brush strokes and continual thin coats as you begin stronger layers with the smaller brush, focusing on building that strong, vibrant colour. The trick is to keep the paint moving as it settles but not as it's drying, and in order to do that the right consistency of paint to water is really crucial, and this can vary between paint brands. But don't try and adjust it once it begins drying, always allow each layer to dry before applying another. I then began to try and build a vibrant glow-like orange, and so I began a sort of glaze of fanatic orange from the 2 thin coats and building up thin layers toward the more prominent areas of the armour panels. This colour will predominantly end up covering almost all the armour. In fact, fanatic orange is probably the primary colour I would say I use for the Pyre. Orange is one of those colours that everyone seems to have but never really happy with, and I know GW used to have an amazing orange when I was a kid, but since then they all seem a little dull. So the build-up of multiple types of orange from a very orangey red like Centurion Red is the way I went about it here, and the result actually turned out pretty good. Again though, keep the paint thin here and to an almost glazed consistency. I was pleasantly surprised on how well each layer of fanatic orange built with each pass over the last. The vibrancy was very prominent. And this is the result of Centurion Red and a glaze over of fanatic orange. Quite vibrant if you ask me. Moving on to a bit of shading, I used Apocalypse Sky from 2 thin coats. This is another red in the range, and I chose that because after getting such a vibrant result with the orange, I didn't want to contrast it too heavy with shade, as I knew the coming black trim would do that enough. So for the shading, I watered it down again to a thin glaze and slowly built up the thin layers in the recesses of the orange where the shadows may be present, gradually expanding further into the previous colours area to get a bit more of a blend going between the two. I also used a more concentrated dose of Apocalypse Sky and run it into the recess areas between the trim and the panels. This part did take a while because I mainly focused on one area at a time, constantly swapping colours on my palette and re-establishing my rhythm from glaze to line shade. Probably wouldn't recommend that if painting entire armies of the Pyre, and could probably say you could get away with just the line recess shade between the trim and the panels if you wanted. If doing the glazing though, don't forget to line shade the lighter areas on the opposite of the glaze build-up in the shadow areas. So remember to run the line shade into all the darker areas of the glaze build-up, but also into the recesses of the fanatic orange areas too. It will be subtle as it is only a medium tone red, but it's perfect if you want to slowly build contrast on the orange. Now here I used Orange Flame from 2 thin coats, and bloody hell this paint is a pain. I can see its potential, and maybe I just have a bad batch, but when trying to use it as a solid line highlight, it couldn't tell me to sod off any louder, it just wouldn't show. But as a glaze, it knocked Fanatic Orange out of the park. So I reduced the amount of paint and water on the brush at any given time and slowly built up on the Fanatic Orange areas. I really tried to limit this to just the extreme areas of Fanatic Orange to help build a bright orange highlight, but I stress, don't overdo it. It's very vibrant and can start looking yellow if not careful. Really try to avoid this colour going over any of the Apocalypse Sky or Centurion Red areas. and just limit it to the Fanatic orange. So hopefully you can see here where I've built up on the Fanatic orange areas with that orange flame and how easily it can turn to yellow if overdone, so just keep that in mind and be careful. Moving on to the trim, I will be using Black Red from AK Interactive. Now here is another step you could probably skip if you want and just go straight to the black. However, I knew the trim does come into contact with the orange panels just on the lip of the trim and was concerned about getting black onto the orange. So I utilised a dark red to act as an orange shadow, and as you can see, and run it deliberately in between the trim and the panel. This not only made the shadow look more natural, but also helped establish what was going to be black in the next step. So moving to the Abaddon Black from Citadel, it was much easier and quicker getting the trim done, as I now didn't have to get into contact with any of the orange, as the Black Red has already covered that for me. Abaddon Black certainly isn't one of my favourites. Its coverage is really not great, and the reason I used it for the Pyre was I was hoping it would have more of a shine to it, like most Citadel paints, but honestly it almost looks like leather when you look at it now. So clearly learning from my own observation, I used Vallejo Black for the rubber areas between the joints. One YouTube demerit point later, I began on the fur around the Terminator. I wanted to keep things easy and quick, so chose to layer all the fur and simultaneously the skulls with Skeleton Legion from 2 thin coats. I then used Citadel Agrax Earthshade wash on the same areas, but for the fur tried to build it up in the more dense areas with a couple of coats, thoroughly allowing each coat to dry, and the tusks also got the same treatment, pushing the shade toward the thicker area and letting it build up slightly. And once the wash was dry, re-established with a layer of Skeleton Legion, again over the raised areas. I then used Ivory Tusk from 2 thin coats and dry brushed over the fur and the tusks. To highlight the trim, I used Citadel Mechanica Standard Grey and ran the edge of the brush along the sharper points of the trim. This is always the bane of any Chaos army, and it's not needed if you don't want to do it, but my advice is don't water down the paint too much. What you want is a thicker paint but less of it, so you can control it at all times. Watered down paints run and are a lot more uncontrollable. And after that was done, I decided to use Dawnstone from Citadel to pick out all the bolts along the black trim. So starting on the metallics, for the silver I used AK Interactive Oily Steel and used this for the bright silver areas on the model, so like the areas on the chain axe and on his combi bolter, and also chains on the skulls. Before giving all these areas a wash over with Citadel's non-oil. For the chain axe, I wanted to try a new paint in my range called Bits of Tin from 2 thin coats. And this colour seems to be inspired or heavily based upon the old Citadel colour called Tin Bits, and I decided to use it all over the random areas of the chain axe. and on some decorative selective spots on the combi bolter as well. I then used AK Interactive Dark Grey on any other previous non-armour black areas I coated with Vallejo Black, so the loincloth and rubber joints in the armour. The bits of tin was pretty shiny, so I wanted to dull that down a little bit with a black wash, so I used Oblivion Black Wash from 2 thin coats and used it just to take a bit of that shine away and knock it back into the sort of style with the rest of the silver on the chain axe. For a bit of difference, any of the mechanical or older sort of metallic areas of silver, I used dark silver and applied it all over the spikes and the joints between the orange armour. I then highlighted the bits of tin with battle axe brass from 2 thin coats, just adding it towards the edges of the axe along the rim and on the more prominent surface areas on the bolt gun as well. And to finish off the silver, a quick highlight with mithril blade from 2 thin coats. Now I personally don't see the need on making these helmets on the spikes too perfect, as clearly the day wasn't perfect for them, and so a rough scratchy coat of silver was applied before a contrast paint was applied to show the slight sign of colour that was once on there long ago. I also did a very quick rough dry brush of Screaming Skull from Citadel all over the skulls, just to help scratch them up just a little bit. The Pyre is shown to have green eyes, so I used Contrast Dark Angel's Green from Citadel and ran it onto the lenses of the helm and also the helmet on the back. And once that was dry, I covered the area with a thin line of white, any white will do, and then lay it over with Hexwrath Flame from Citadel. And there you go, a Terminator from the Pyre Warband. Thank you for sticking with me on this one. I know in the end there was a lot of orange, but honestly the Pyre is such an unknown legion, I was intrigued and wanted to give it a go. But please let me know if you liked it or if it gave you any ideas, and also let me know in the comments if there's a specific faction or colour you'd like to see painted. But thank you again, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.